Welcome to the AWS Cloud Costing webinar. My name is Bingham and I'm an AWS Solutions Architect. In the next 40 minutes or so, I'll take you through 8 lessons Autumn Leaf has learned over the last 8 years or so. These lessons should get you thinking about how to manage cloud costs as you take your journey into the cloud.
So just a quick coverage of the 8 tips we're going to provide. So moving into the cloud is a journey, it's not a sprint. So plan ahead, think about it as a journey, pack and plan carefully. Learn to become a cloud native. When you first go into the cloud, it's different. It's different for everyone. It's a different way of managing, it's a different way of costing. It is a complete paradigm shift from everything you know. Learn to fight the cost bubble, that upfront cost. How do you manage the fact that you've got duplications, a duplication of work that's happening on premises or in other data centers in the cloud? Learn to switch the lights off. Probably the most important lesson in cost management is waste management. Yes, you can waste stuff in the cloud. So with that, always be cleaning, ABC. And then in terms of that, something that is a challenge for a lot of businesses, moving away from a traditional annual CapEx cycle to budgeting that is changing in front of a live studio audience all the time. Another important thing is be on the alert for cost overruns. You no longer have a situation where you've got a fixed server, and if it's overutilized, it's not going to cost you more. You now need to be vigilant and disciplined in monitoring all of your systems. And then lastly, tag like everyone is watching. Tagging is your friend. Tags help you find your information. It helps you sort. It helps you organize. It helps you allocate costs. It is your friend. So be diligent in your tagging. All right, so right into it. The first thing is, and I'd be interested to see where you all are in your cloud journey. We feel that as you go through that cloud journey, you learn more and more. I think we'll put a poll out to find out where we think you all are in your cloud journey. But it starts off with everyone being a complete noob, being a cloud tourist, exploring, not quite sure what they're at. Your eyes are big while you walk around this new city and you enjoy the landscape. Okay. Then as you start to learn a little bit more, you become an immigrant. You're kind of not necessarily a fully fledged local citizen, but you certainly have a little bit more of an understanding of the landscape. To the point where finally you awarded your citizenship, you really have a much better understanding of the landscape and the way the country and the environment works, to the point where you're a complete cloud native. You're a second generation expert in the cloud. So I think we will push a poll out. I'd be interested to see where you all are in that journey. Regardless of where you are on the journey, what's important is cost management. Whether you're at 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, cost management and cost controls are important. So to become a cloud native, you've got to learn to work with elastic costs, to work with elastic resources. So what that is about is, if you look at this diagram here, you will see that in the red, this is what your actual utilization should be. So in other words, regardless of what infrastructure you have or what hardware or what capital you've got, this is what you expect that you require from your services. Now, in a traditional environment, this rectangular or horizontal line is typically what is involved in CapEx. You're either overcapitalizing, or you're undercapitalizing, and over there you're overcapitalizing. You don't have elastic compute, so you have to adjust continuously. In the cloud, you can be elastic, which means you can always just provide what is required in your services. Now that in principle sounds fantastic, but in reality, it's not that easy. And let me tell you what is easy, generally speaking. It is easy to scale up. It is harder to scale down. Yeah. What you'll find is as people scale up, they'll go up and up and up, and they'll forget to shut down things, or they will over provide at the point where the usage goes down. So what we're going to talk about today is how to help you manage your costs so that your costs are value-based. They're linked to your actual usage. So becoming a cloud native is learning about how important cost optimization is. And I see cost optimization as it's like a wave. It's like being in the sea and feeling the rhythm of the sea. Usually business dictates that speed and agility is the essence in cloud. Usually, in my experience, a lot of the reason for moving to the cloud is achieving a business goal, a business objective, a business service as quickly as possible, which means that usually costs take second fiddle. As soon as that's been done, you must go through a rhythm and a cycle of cost optimization. And here, I've got an example where we migrated some systems, footstoots as they were, but we re-architected them. In this case, it was a big data system. This was the cost. And then we separated the data and compute using S3 and EMR. And we more than halved the cost savings. After that, we then did some waste management by literally shutting down systems when they weren't being used. We've achieved further savings by discovering that we could use Spot, which is a lower cost offering for compute services. Okay, and then after that, we went to managed services where it was serverless. And essentially what you can get, which is truly staggering in the cloud and not unusual, is you can get in the region of an 80% or 90% saving with a little bit of work. But you have to go through these cycles. What is important in business is that you must realize that cost optimization and cost management in the business, or cost ops, has a return on investment. If you have a dedicated team or dedicated person to it, you will get the benefits. And in that journey, you will frequently encounter what we call the cost bubble. The cost bubble is that initial cost that you get when you first move a workload into the cloud. That cost bubble is incurred because you've got duplicate resources, duplicate services, and you're not just generally efficient at using that service in the cloud. So one of the things that you want to do when you first go into that environment is, while you experience this cost bubble, how can you shrink that cost bubble? I can't prevent myself from saying this is almost like flattening the curve, right? We want to go and say, how do we shrink that bubble? And there are lots of ways to do this. And it's not just in your upfront work. It is an ongoing thing. Everyone, as they go into the cloud, has ongoing workloads again and again and again. And what you want to do is look at what is that upfront cost. And there are a number of things that you can do. The first one is get your cost controls up front. Have a discussion up front. I've got a new workload, I've got a website, or I've got a database that I need to start up. Get those cost controls up front. And we'll be talking about some of those strategies just now. Make use of free tier credits. Go and find out what free tiers there are. Speak to AWS and find out about getting a POC entitlement. We have often with customers got $5K US dollars or 3K or 4K to help with the initial spend. It is not unusual for AWS to offer credits to help with this cost bubble. Speak to your partner, speak to your AWS account manager, look at your enterprise agreements, but this cost bubble can be reduced. So I'm going to hop out and go into a simple demo of AWS Cost Explorer. I'm going to talk about some cost management. So here is the AWS Cost Explorer within the AWS console. And this is used by many to go and manage their costs. Now, what I've got here is an internal set of costs. We're looking in the Cost Explorer as a dashboard that allows us to see a breakdown and to go and view costs in various forms or fashions. It is provided in all AWS environments, and it gives you detailed drill down of all of your costing. You must remember that in AWS, Azure, and all of those services, everything is API based. Everything you do has a cost associated with it. You can drill down into that. So if we look here, for example, I'm looking at the cost for a period of time, and I have a breakdown. There's virtual private cloud costs, EC2 other, which is generally storage costs. There's a tax cost. I've got some elastic load balances. I've got some Kubernetes costs and some others. Now I can go and drill down and have a look at those costs. So I've generated some reports here. I want to go and look at the last 3 months costs. Okay, and I can see these costs here. I can also choose to have a look at them by stack. And I can see my costs are climbing, which is a very important thing. I might want to look at those costs excluding things like tax. By the way, if I click under filters here, you'll see that I can go and remove items that I don't want to visualize. So if you look on the left here, on this horizontal bar, I can organize and group things. So here I'm grouping things by service. So each of these items, EC2 other, etc., is a service. I can link it by region, by linked account, instance types, etc. And I can also choose to filter this. So in this case, I actually want to drill down and look a bit further into what's going on. So I've got a report that I've generated that looks at the daily costs. And I want to see what's happening. And this is the last month. Now, by the way, this is something I'm looking at fresh. So we'll go and see what's going on here. First things first is I want to get a better view of what these costs are. And I'm seeing the tax item here. I want to remove that so I can drill down into more detail. So I'm going to go under more options and go to chart type. And I'm going to say I want to search by usage only. And apply the filter. And now it's going to remove tax. And I can get a better view of what my costs are. Now I can see there's potential. It looks like, and this is not a fake environment. This is real. I can see that there's some costs being spent on a tool, Neptune. Neptune is a graphing database. So clearly there's some work happening in our team in doing so in terms of doing some graphing work. And it's costing me it's costing our team roughly about $36 a day. Now, if I want to go and drill down and find out more about that Neptune cost, I can now use the filter. So I'm currently looking at things by service, but I want to go and say, I'm interested in looking just at Neptune. So I go under my filters and I select service and I type in here Neptune. Okay, now I can see specifically Neptune costs. Okay, but what you'll see here is I'm only seeing the actual cost, but I want to get an idea of what does that cost entail. Okay, what I can do here now is click on usage type. And now I'm getting a breakdown for that service. What is the type of cost? And I can see here now that there was a cost spent on, and it's breaking it down for me in EU database R5. So this is a type of compute for a database, an R5 XL, which is a RAM intensive machine. I think it's got about somewhere around 16 cores, something like that. So primarily my costs are compute. Now, if I wanted to see a little bit more about that, I could do some interesting things. I could go under usage type here and go and say, I want to search a little bit more and go and find out what that instance cost is. Okay, and it'll be R5XL. Now what immediately happens is the graph is actually divided in two. If you look here, there's costs and there's usage. So underneath usage, I can see now that it's actually giving me a breakdown of total usage hours if you look at the top left. Okay, so now I can see that we're spending 34 hours on this. But I want to go and look at this by hour now, because I'm interested in seeing if this instance is being managed on a daily basis and being shut down. So I'm going to go to the last day by setting a filter on the day. And now I'm looking at the daily costs. So this, what you're looking at is I think a 2-hour breakdown. But what you'll see here, there is a gap here. And that is a positive thing. Now, if you scroll, if I scroll down, you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that I can actually download a CSV of this report. And what is interesting for me is I've got each hour's breakdown. I've got very detailed breakdown. And what is useful for me to see is that the guys were diligent. At 3 o'clock, they shut this instance down. So we're not wasting resources. So that is a very useful way of quickly drilling down and looking at your costs. I'm going to go back into my presentation and talk about some other useful things to do in cost management. Okay, so just getting back into the presentation. So the next tip for me is the most important thing in cost management in the cloud, in my experience, is the waste management. And most waste occurs in sandboxes and test environments and dev environments. The reason being is that it's exploratory. There's a little bit less discipline applied to those environments. Okay, so prod usually is a little more fixed, a little more controlled, but your danger is in the dev environments. And I want to give you an example of how you can dramatically save costs. The first thing is that in my experience in the dev environment, I don't believe that developers are typically working on the weekend. And I looked at an environment, a customer's environment, and I saw this here. If you look at this area, this clearly highlights the fact that there was some work happening. This is a by day view. These are days, but it actually shows the hourly breakdown. And what you'll see here is that the resources continued to be used. Now, in this case, there was some database usage and some EC2 usage. Now, in databases, RDS and EC2, you can shut them both down. A lot of people don't know you can actually shut down an RDS, but this cost could have been saved. Now, if you take into account 2 days of every week plus public holidays, we found that you can typically get a 34% saving by just shutting down over the weekend. So have a look at your development costs and just make sure people are shutting down over the weekend. Okay. But you can go further than that and look at the daily costs and say, you know what, if our costs are running 24/7, you can save even more by just making your environment only running during the day when people are developing on it. And so you can achieve dramatic savings by just shutting down or starting up, say, at 7 o'clock in the morning and shutting down at 6 o'clock in the evening. You've immediately got a dramatic saving. So 55% plus the 34% is a dramatic saving on your costs. So you're already going in the region of an 80% saving just by a little bit of diligence in your development environment. And it'd be amazing how many companies don't do this. They spend a lot of time optimizing their instances, but this is the low-hanging fruit, guys. Save money by just shutting the instances down. So here's an example of what I've experienced, and this is the actual truth. This is the rhythm of what you can save. So this is an actual environment where we were doing some savings on a web application. So the costs were roughly $300 per month, and when we went for a weekend shutdown, the weekend shutdown plus public holidays took the cost from $300 to $193. But then we switched it off at night, and the cost went from $193 to $72. But then we said, you know what, guys, the developers aren't always developing on the environment. So let's do an automated shutdown in the evening, but the startup of the dev environment is manual. So we built a script so that they could start up the environment, and immediately the cost halved again because the developers were not always working on the environment at 7 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes it would be 10 o'clock, sometimes it would be 9 o'clock, but they halved the costs. You then can use an additional cost option called Spot Block. And what Spot is Spot is a service where if you compare what they call on-demand, where you're guaranteed your resource, AWS has this challenge. They have an enormous amount of compute capacity in their cloud. And there is an enormous amount of underutilized compute. And just like a restaurant or just like an airplane, they want to fill up that space. They want to get maximum usage of space. So they will offer some low-cost seats into their environment by offering Spot. The challenge with these seats is literally it's like booking a restaurant. You make your booking, but you've done it at a with a where it's a 90% cost saving. So in on demand, the cost is $1 an hour, but in spot it's $10 an hour. But if AWS runs out of capacity, someone can come and say, "Sir, I'm taking your seat. Sorry, you and your data will have to move to another place." But spot block is a 6-hour on-demand guarantee. So in other words, for 6 hours, you're guaranteed that you get that resource. And it can give you something like a 60 or 70% saving. So you can use spot or spot block. You can even then go further and look at Aurora, a serverless service where you're not running a database. And this is a classic example of MySQL, a simple MySQL database, going to Aurora, which is actually a faster service, but is only, it's not running a server in the background, can actually save you costs. So if you look at this, going from $300 to $18 is a 94% saving. And that is not atypical. You can do this. Now, prod is a different kettle of fish, because typically in prod, you're running a 24/7 operation, right? So there isn't this night switch or weekend switch. It is a 24/7 operation, okay? So there are a couple of other ways of dealing with this. And these are things that AWS offer you. The first one is they offer you something called a reserved instance. And what you do there is, let's say that you're running a 24/7 operation of an EC2 instance called an M5XL, okay? It's got X amount of capacity, and you're running it 24/7. You can get about a 40, 50, 60% saving depending on what you do, but just by booking that for a year, 2 years, or 3 years. And what you'll get is you'll get that instance type, or that instance class, like an M5 of any of them, at that cost discount. But it is going to assume you're running it 24/7. So this is where you've got to be careful. If you go and get a reserved instance, but you're only running that reserved instance 12 hours a day, if you get a reserved instance, yes, you're saving 40% of the hourly cost, but when you shut it down, you're still paying for the cost. So in other words, this is designed for a 24/7 operation. But having said that, if you have more than one resource, reserved instances provide a really good way of saving production costs. AWS, in their cost management tool, has got very good guidelines for recommendations. And I've taken a screenshot at the bottom here where they analyze your infrastructure and will give you recommendations for making use of reserved instances. So reserved instances is great. It's very specific to an EC2 class or an instance, and you book it for a period of maybe 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And obviously your discount increases as you make a further commitment in time. There is another option that AWS recently offered, and this is a much more flexible one. In this one, and it's called a savings plan, also available in the Cost Explorer, but what it gives you is the ability to just provide a budget of an amount per month that you think you will spend. And if you, just like this, book it for a year, regardless of the instance type or whatever, it'll give you a discount on that amount of spend that you've put into the environment. So let's say you're spending $300 a month on EC2. Go and take a savings plan of $200. And so you're committed to paying $200. But of those $200, you're getting a discount. Okay. A great plan again for prod. And highly recommended. And you can use a combination of a savings plan with reserved instances to get really good savings. In terms of the support and what you get from AWS, everything I've talked about is switching off the lights, shutting down resources. But there is another piece of information in terms of wastage that we need to be careful about. And that is that in development, for example, Jenny is running the server every day. It's a machine with 32 cores, and it's got 122 gigs of RAM. It's a really powerful machine. And she is diligently switching it off at 6 o'clock every evening and starting it up at 8 o'clock in the morning. However, that resource is only being 1% utilized. So that is a complete wastage of that resource. And so AWS gives you this ability to go and look inside of resources and to make sure that you're maximizing the use of those resources. So it doesn't matter that you're shutting down the resource. If you're only using it 1%, perhaps Jenny in this case should have gone from that machine to a smaller machine. Now, AWS and other organizations such as Cloud Health and Cloud Checker actually go and give you insights on this. AWS has a service called Trusted Advisor that will go and tell you what you're using, what you're not using, how effective the usage is, and where you could potentially achieve savings, even with a specific recommendation for savings. Now, the Trusted Advisor gives you different levels of service depending on which subscription you've got. And a lot of people, in my experience, don't know which ones which offerings there are. So you start with essentially free and basic, where there's essentially no cost there, and you don't have any technical support, so there isn't specifically a response time. But when you get to developer, you start to getting some support. My experience is the AWS support is excellent. For any of you, I would recommend that you look at a developer subscription support. This $29, I think, is per account that you have. But in my experience, it's well worth it. When you get support from AWS, they typically get you in touch with someone who's a subject matter expert. And they do give you access to 7 trusted advisor checks, and I'll show you a little bit more about that just now. When you go into a business service, and again, this is a highly recommended service, you get a full set of information from Trusted Advisor, which goes beyond just cost optimization. It looks at wastage, it looks at service limits, it looks at resiliency. It provides you a fairly comprehensive set of recommendations around your environment. At $100 a month, or the greater of $100 a month, or 10, 7, 5, and 3% of your monthly usage. It's got certain tiers which you can have a look in the support contract. It is well worthwhile. When you get into an enterprise account, sorry, this is supposed to be $1 here, the cost goes up quite a bit to $15,000 or a percentage, or the higher of that or percentage. These two are highly recommended. The chat support and the business support is really, really good. So just having a look at the Trusted Advisor. The Trusted Advisor, a tool just like Cost Explorer, it's available within your AWS console. And within it, it goes and analyzes your environment and comes up with some very useful recommendations. So I've taken a screenshot of an environment, and what you can see here is one of the recommendations was to look at low utilization instances, things where the CPU utilization is very low. And it says there's an instance type here. It actually gives you the instance ID, and it actually goes and says, look, the utilization here was 0%, 0.1%. And it says, go and have a look at that with some recommendations. So you can clearly get some good indications from the Trusted Advisor on recommendations for doing optimization within instances. Here's another example of what's been shown in Trusted Advisor. Over here, they're saying there's a $68 saving by going and looking at your EBS storage and things you can do around EBS storage, things that are either not used or underutilized. So again, really good recommendations here. Okay. I don't know if you saw the poll there, but it's very, so one of the things that is a question that has been asked is, I don't know if any of you are aware, but since January, because of the escalation in the Rand-dollar exchange rate, the Rand-dollar has resulted in a 30% cost increase. And for a lot of existing organizations on AWS, that would have had a big cost impact. So cost optimization is really important there. I'd be interested to see if someone has views on that, but something you've got to be wary of. So recommendation number 6, budget whack-a-mole. AWS has a great tool to go and help with budgets. What you can do in the tool, it's again available in the billing and cost explorer environment, is you can go and set a monthly budget, and you can go and set accumulative budgets. What is useful about this is that you can now go and tell the system to give you alerts based on budget spend. A good example of this is you can go and say, give me a warning when I'm at 60% or 80% of my spend for the month. And this can go and be configured to send an email alert to a group of individuals. And you can slice and dice and break down these budgets as much as you want to go and analyze very specific things. But these budgets are very useful. What is very important in the cloud is to understand that you're generally not working with a fixed budget. Your budget is changing all the time, and you have to be vigilant with it. So setting budgets on a monthly scale and setting some ability to escalate it, which the tool can do, is highly recommended. And it is worth management and teams looking at that. So highly recommended that you go and set up budgeting, but not an annual budget, a monthly budget. Another very, very important thing in costing. Costing requires constant vigilance and discipline. We've had a situation with the customer where there was a $100K US overspend because of a looped Lambda with some massive threshold limits that we removed for other workloads. That was incurred within 1 day just by having a loop, a log within a log within a log within a log. And the scale of the cloud means that individuals have the capacity to run a lot very fast. That is a double-edged sword. With great power comes responsibility. So one of the things that we think is important is, within organizations, you must create this culture of individual accountability. When people are being taught how to work in the cloud, they must learn about the discipline of cloud. A suggestion on that is, for example, set a week where people are rotated within the team and are responsible for that week for the cost management. So it gives them a little bit of awareness of what those costs are. In tagging, if you use a tag, well, you can actually go and break down that cost and see, Fred, this little query that you ran, it cost us $14 or it cost us $200. And people start to become much more aware of their costs. That is an important part of that responsibility, because if someone is responsible for shutting down something and it's 7 o'clock in the evening and they're having dinner and they're lazy, they'll say, well, you know what, I'll just leave it running. It doesn't matter. And then you've got a problem. You need individual accountability. You need to go and set some benchmarks, some thresholds, so that you can go and decide what your normal spend is. AWS does not provide a daily spend limit. If you're interested, you're welcome to come and chat to us. We can help you as an organization with putting a daily limit in, but it's highly recommended. What I'm talking about here is simply something that says per account, like dev, QA, prod, or whatever you've got, set a limit to say, I expect that my cost in dev is $50 a day, but alert me if it goes over $60 a day, because then I know I have a problem. So what you can now do is get an email that says, hey, there was $60 spend, something's wrong. And that is useful to do that on a daily basis, because if it's left unchecked for a week or a month, then you have a serious problem. So highly recommended that you set yourself a daily alert for any overspend. In terms of managing the costs, it is very important to be able to isolate environments. In our case, we always recommend that for every workload, so let's say you're a business and you've got 5 different projects in the cloud. You've got a website, you've got a database, you've got an operational system. Separate them all into their own accounts with their own dev, QA, and prod. By doing this, you can, in your costing, very clearly manage your budgets independently in each of these environments. So isolation is not just useful for security, it's also useful for cost management. Within AWS, there actually is a threshold service that you can get where you can go and say, in this account, you can only run this number of resources or this number of servers. It's a very useful feature. One of the things that we're still hoping to get from AWS is a pay-as-you-go service, which I think will be very useful for a sandbox environment, for a dev environment. They haven't got it yet, but I think it's on the list for AWS of things to do. What I'm talking about there, and I think you all can see how this potentially could be very useful, is to go and say, you know what, Mr. Developer, I'm giving you $200. There's your spend. When you hit those $200, sorry, everything stops. Okay. Right now, all you can do is set an alert when those $200 are spent, and you can block the person from spinning up new resources, but the existing services will continue. Okay. Set some SLAs so that you can manage these costs. SLAs in the cloud mean something very different because it is cost, because there's so much cost allocation to it. So set an SLA, a cost management SLA. And the last thing, and it's just a very, it's a tip we highly recommend. If you look online on the internet, or if you're welcome to speak to Autumn Leaf and Obsidian about it, in a sandbox environment where you're giving people the ability to go and explore AWS, okay, how often do those costs overrun? Where someone's left something running for the week, someone's left something running for the month, and suddenly your sandbox, your little training account has been abused. Our suggestion is put a kill switch on that environment, so that when people go into that environment, they know that on Friday, every evening on Friday, once a week, everything in that account is completely deleted and terminated. All S3, all EBS, all EC2, everything is terminated, and it starts back on the Monday with a clean account. That is something to help you with cost management. And then lastly, but very importantly, tag like everyone is watching. Tagging is something that requires a lot of discipline, but it has benefits in a number of different areas first, beyond just cost management. Okay, tagging allows you to automate things. You can set rules using a tag, and a good example is about switching the lights off. We use tags, for example, to shut things down. What we do there is we have a shutdown for 6 o'clock in the evening for all the resources in, say, a dev environment, but there is a tag called a toggle tag. And if the developer does need to work that evening, they can flip that toggle tag by just changing the tag value to off or on. When the automated service goes and looks at all resources, and it's shutting down, and it hits that resource and it hits that instance, and it sees that the toggle tag is flagged, it'll switch the flag back, but it will skip shutting down that resource, so that developer can continue working that evening. That's a good use of tagging. Tagging can also be used for access management, so you can actually control access to resources using tags. And lastly, lastly, you can use tags just to organize and filter and find things, especially when you've got a large number of resources in an environment. So for people working in the environment, tagging is also very important. But lastly, it's very important to do tagging correctly for cost allocation. Now, it's important to remember that for costs, tagging is a point-in-time item. And that means that on resources, you're being billed potentially by the second. Your billing logs that are stored are by the second. So if you've got something incorrectly tagged at the beginning of the month and you go and look at your report, but you fix the tags at the end of the month, all of your costing for that period of the month will be incorrectly tagged. So remember, the tagging is point in time. Okay, so that's it on tagging. And my last slide is just, and I've got a link to this, but AWS has a collection of services to help you with cost management. And I've got a link at the bottom there, but they've got tools to help you organize through cost allocation tags. They've got reporting services, the Cost Explorer. There's the consolidating billing tool. There are access management mechanisms, so you can actually use security as a mechanism to control costs, or use Control Tower as a landing zone to control costs. And you can do forecasting. You can do budgeting. You can look at different purchasing options like reserved instances, savings plans, spot. You can use the elasticity. A good example is autoscaling groups, where you can cool down. Let's say you're running 5 instances because they're listening to the amount of usage. And as the usage drops down, a metric says, if my usage is below 60%, then drop down the number of instances. So auto-scaling groups are a good example of right-sizing in elasticity. AWS also has, as I said, the Cost Explorer for inspection. So AWS really gives you a massive and useful array of things to look at to help you with cost management. And that is the end of the presentation. So thanks everyone for listening.